Hey, what's up, Logos American History students? It is Tuesday, June 16th, 2020, day 57 overall of our e-learning experience, day 7 of term 6. We are rolling right along into our second week of term 6, week 2 of 6 weeks. So we're rolling right along in term 6, right? It'll be over before we know it. We are rolling right through the 1970s, which we started back last term, talking about Nixon, talking about Nixon last week. This week we're talking about the two presidents that followed Nixon, and we can see them under topics on our Blackbaud. If we get into Blackbaud, there's our class page with all the information on e-learning, and then we have right next to the bulletin board tab, which is where our class page starts on, we have the topics tab. And if we click on the topics tab, you will see our most recent topic. Last week we did Nixon. Today we're doing, and this week we're doing Ford and Carter. Did you even know we had a President Jerry and a President Jimmy? I know, it's weird, huh? It's okay if you've never heard of these guys because they weren't president for that long, right? Jimmy Carter was only president for one term. That'd be 4 years. Jerry Ford was president even shorter time. Jerry Ford was president from 1974 to 1977, technically, right? Little less than 3 years, right? How did that happen? Well, he was Nixon's vice president when Richard Nixon resigned. You know, Jerry Ford, who we're going to talk about today, he is actually the reading section for today. Chapter 25, section 4, you see right there under the downloads. We also have the questions for chapter 25, section 4 embedded over here, the Google Forms. If we click on that download, we'll see. This section's all about the Ford administration. But you know, Jerry Ford, before he became president, he was the vice president. Before he became vice president, he was a congressman. How did he become vice president? He wasn't elected vice president. The vice president under Richard Nixon was a guy named Spiro Agnew. Spiro Agnew, before Nixon resigned, the vice president resigned. Spiro Agnew, on a totally unrelated thing. He resigns, and so there's no vice president. And so they need a new vice president. While Nixon's being investigated for Watergate, in the middle of all this, they have no vice president. So they find this guy, Jerry Ford, that everybody likes, that can get confirmed by Congress because he's from Congress. And so Jerry Ford is nominated by Nixon to be the next vice president, and this is the process when there's no vice president. Congress approves Nixon's nomination, and Ford becomes vice president without anyone voting for him. And then Nixon resigns, and Ford becomes the president. And so he's the only person in history to become the president of the United States without ever being elected president or vice president. He wasn't elected to either. He was appointed to vice president and then became the president when Nixon resigns. And he serves the rest of Nixon's term and loses the election of 1976 to Jimmy Carter. And so, yeah, he only serves really a couple years. And that couple years was not marked by much success, right? That's why he didn't get reelected or elected. What were his failures? A lot of it wasn't, completely in his control, right? The economy was really bad in the 1970s. And when the economy's going good, the president gets all the credit. When the economy's going bad, the president gets all the blame. But the fact of the matter is, the president doesn't have a lot of control over the economy. And in fact, when the president does try and do stuff to fix the economy, usually messes it up even worse. And Ford was a great example of that. Ford really didn't do much to fix the economy. So I guess that's good, right? He didn't make it worse, right? He didn't do anything. His approach was, well, it says, like Herbert Hoover's here. And remember, Herbert Hoover was the president when we fell into the Great Depression. And what did Hoover do when we fell into the Great Depression? Nothing. He said, it's not the government's job to fix the economy, right? The economy will fix itself. I'm just going to leave it alone. Not my job. Okay, that's one approach. Like I said, at least he couldn't mess it up any worse than it already was. No, his strategy was something called WIN, right? W-I-N. Whip inflation now. right? Inflation was really bad. What is inflation? Inflation is a general rise in prices. Things are becoming more and more expensive, right? So people can't afford to buy as much stuff. That's what inflation is. And so what Ford's plan was for dealing with inflation was to produce a bunch of these buttons, these pins that say WIN, Whip Inflation Now, Shop Super Thrift, and hand them out to Americans and just tell everybody, you all need to just, be thrifty, and we're going to whip inflation. And that's it. That's all he did. And guess what? Didn't work. On the foreign policy front, there he is shaking hands with the Soviet leader, just like Nixon. He learned that from Nixon. But again, he continued Nixon's policy of, realpolitik, detente, trying to, do what's in the United States' best interests when it comes to getting along with other countries, not really following any ideologies. So what if this guy's a raving communist? We can find things to work on, agree on, that will help America. Ford tried to send troops back to Vietnam, but he was stopped by Congress with the War Powers Act, so that's good. That's about it. He was president for the bicentennial, the 200th anniversary of America, so he got to see that. Other than that, Ford's presidency was pretty lame. Probably the lamest part of all, though, was this. Let's watch this video. This was a televised speech, or part of a televised speech that Ford put out on a Saturday morning. He hoped no one would be watching. They'd all be sleeping. Let's see what he had to say.
Therefore, I, Gerald R. Ford, President of the United States, pursuant to the pardon power conferred upon me by Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, have granted, and by these presents do grant, a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon for all offenses against the United States which he, Richard Nixon, has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from July 20, 1969 through August 9, 1974.
Boo! What did he just say there? He said that Richard Nixon had to resign because he was involved in a criminal conspiracy and cover-up. A bunch of people who worked for Nixon ended up going to jail. But what does Nixon get? A full, free, and absolute pardon, right? One of the first things Ford does, he takes over for Nixon. Nixon resigns, and Ford gives him a pardon. Says Nixon will never, ever be held accountable for any of the crimes that he committed. Why did Ford do this? Well, Ford's reasoning was, if he doesn't do that, and Nixon is charged with a crime, and Nixon is put on trial, that would last for years, right? And it would, further damage American society and our political, process. His argument was, a former president, because of politics, could never get a fair trial, right? And so the easiest thing to do is just pardon him and move on. I guess, but that gets us to the question of the day. So let's take a look at the question of the day. I want to know what you guys think. You guys, I kind of gave you a hint to what I think of this guy and his pardon for Nixon. And, I don't like Nixon, so I wanted to see him rot in jail. But I get where Ford was coming from. But the question of the day, the President of the United States has the power to grant pardons to anyone who has committed any crimes for any reason he wants. And that person gets the crimes completely erased from the record. Do you think the president, and whoever the president is, that includes Trump right now, Trump can pardon anybody for any crime. He may even be able to pardon himself. He's asked that question. Do you think the president should have that kind of power? Why or why not? Right? I mean, there's a reason why the president has that power. This is an even better question if you want to answer. Who would you grant a pardon to if you had the power? Again, I mean, I could see a good reason for a pardon in certain circumstances. When someone has been unfairly convicted or unfairly, treated or something like that. Or if it's just your good friend or somebody you really like. You can do it for any reason. So let me know what you think. Answer the question of the day. You got some reading comprehension questions for the section on the Nixon presidency. And if you have any questions or concerns, as always, please let me know. Peace.